everyone, and welcome to our follow-up meeting with Dean Vidler. Dean Vidler, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Hello.
So today we are going to go over some of the questions that we did not get to in your town hall. So we have a few that were submitted that we did not get to answer that I'm sure would be beneficial for all of the campus to hear from you. And I have a few surprise questions for you today as well that I would love for you to answer.
Okay, sounds good.
Alrighty, so we'll just dive right into this. So my first question for you is today, what is your perspective on disability mental health in higher education? And what do you plan on doing to make education more accessible in the LAS department?
Okay, thank you for this question. I think in the first place, we want to make sure that everyone who can get accepted to UCCS can succeed, right? And so that means helping along the way with health and wellness broadly defined, advising, financial aid, and other types of support that students might need, right? Most of these services are housed outside LAS, but of course, you know, your faculty and staff in your departments care very much about you, right? And hopefully are working to build relationships where you feel comfortable letting them know, what's going on. And of course, disability services itself is the particular office where if you have a documented disability and are seeking accommodations in academic classes, that's where you would go, is to the disability office. That said, there are a few things that we're doing in LAS itself to support those efforts. And one of those is offering digital accessibility training. So we actually have a fund that incentivizes faculty to take this training. And the idea behind the training is to make sure that every bit of digital content that you get in your class, and it doesn't even have to be an online class, it can be a face-to-face class where there's, a link to a YouTube video posted to Canvas or an email, even as simple as that, a website link. How do faculty ensure that all of the bits of digital content that run through the class are digitally accessible? So we actually offer incentives in LAS for faculty to complete that training. One of the things that I actually would like to bring to UCCS is mental health first aid. So mental health first aid isn't actually counseling, right? So we have professionals on campus through the Wellness Center that do that work. Mental health first aid is actually about educating those of us who are not mental health professionals to kind of evaluate and triage crisis situations. Like when a student comes to you in crisis, then you know what to do and what not to do. You know who to call and all of that. And so sometimes that one, attentive person can save a life. And so I actually have two really, really close friends who are colleagues of mine in my field of Spanish literature, and they actually are trained mental health first aid trainers. And so they've educated me a lot on what this program is about, and it's something that would be great, I think, to bring here. But the other thing I wanted to say is that it's not just about students, right? That faculty and staff also, face these challenges. And so it's important from a mental health first aid standpoint, those trained people can also help faculty and staff, right? And of course, I think, we do a pretty good job in terms of our health plans and things like that, accessing mental health services.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great answer. The mental health first aid sounds really interesting to me, and that kind of it kind of goes off of the question I was kind of thinking of earlier. A follow-up question to this is, you said that kind of like the mental health facilities and things like that are kind of outside of the LAS department. They're a different department. Are there different ways to maybe possibly bridge that gap between LAS and, like, let's say the Wellness Center or Disability Services to make it maybe more connected? Or like you said, maybe contacting the Wellness Center for that mental first aid, or if they have anything like that?
Right. So of course, we do have the psychology department sits within LAS. And so they actually train their graduate students through clinical services that are also on campus. So it's just another way to access mental health services. I actually probably don't know enough about the program to know to what extent those areas are connected. But the clinic certainly in psychology certainly serves the community, and also through the aging center that they also support.
Awesome.
So yeah.
Great. Thank you. All right. So on to the next question. This is one that I have for you.
Okay.
Can you tell all of us watching here today something you went through in college that shaped your life or thinking into the way it is today?
I don't know. There's probably several stories. I mean, I will say that one of the experiences I think probably is the most formative for me, it was studying abroad. So while I was an undergraduate, I majored in Spanish. So it's kind of a normal thing to try to do if you can manage to swing it financially, is to study in a Spanish-speaking country, right? You get the language and culture immersion. I was incredibly fortunate. I got to study in Madrid, Spain. And during that time, I took a class that turned out to be, the class that really sparked my research interests and that led me to graduate school. And so I think some of you know from my previous video that you helped to make, Noelle, that I was a professional ballet dancer in my early years. And as a junior in Spain, I took a course in early modern Spanish drama. So these are plays that are more or less contemporary with Shakespeare, but in Spain. That's sort of the short elevator version, although it's much bigger than that. And so we actually got to not just read like a literature class where you like read stuff and write papers about it, but we actually had our class taught by a theater director. And so we read some stuff in the first half of the class, and then we got to stage a series of short one-act farces called Entre Mesas. And then he actually took us to the only still standing open air chorale theater, from the 17th century in a town called Almagro, Spain. And so we got to actually perform on this early modern stage with a Spanish audience, and it was so great. And it really sort of led me really to my research question, which is, kind of like what must this have been like, right? In the 17th century, that was sort of the undergraduate version of the question. But in addition to that, the academic piece of it, just really, polishing my language skills, because I'm not a native Spanish speaker, even though my dad's Cuban, which is another story. And just kind of seeing, even though you think that Spain, it's a European country, it's a Western country, it's not that much different, from American culture, but it really is, right? You start to see just how people do things in different ways, and that it's really neat, So I would say study abroad. If you can do it, I highly encourage you to do it. And even if you think you might not have enough money to go to another country, you can still participate in something called the National Student Exchange, where you spend a semester or a year at another U.S. university. So you can do an exchange with the University of South Dakota, you can do an exchange with the University of Hawaii, or probably somewhere in New York too, and just kind of get a taste of how different other regions of the country are.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe they also do Puerto Rico and Canada as well.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
As well. Yeah, world travel. I absolutely agree with you. I didn't necessarily travel abroad, but I did a volunteer tourism stint in Thailand and Laos with Give Volunteers, which again is another story. And so I agree with you. World travel definitely shaped my perspective as well.
Excellent.
All right. Got another question here for you.
Okay.
With the new budget model, will there be new opportunities to propose new degrees?
Oh, yes, that's the short answer. I guess
Awesome.
I want a longer answer than that. The new budget model is, sometimes called RCM, or responsibility centered management, but it's also called an incentive-based budget model or incentivized budget model. And the reason they use the word incentive is that the way the accounting model is structured incentivizes the revenue generating units to be creative and innovative and do new things, so that you can bring in new revenue, right? And so, yes, ideally, we would have department chairs and faculty really thinking very deeply about their curriculum. Is it the most up to date? Is it the most, are there programs that we could add to our portfolio that would be very popular with students and also would help develop graduates that would be able to get jobs in particular industries, or develop certain transferable skills, that things that we aren't doing now. So yes, that is actually part of the point of the new budget model, right? Is to be responsible for your budget at the college level, and thereby hopefully think about ways in which to increase revenue and ways in which to decrease expenses, right? Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for that. All right, another one coming at you. What has been the hardest thing you've had to do since you've become dean?
Well, okay, I would say two things. The first thing is the pandemic, right? Starting in, I don't envy really anybody who's starting a new job in this scenario. To start a leadership position has been really challenging, right? Because all of the things that you imagine like you would do, walking around the campus and, visiting different departments, you know what I mean? Having coffee and inviting everybody to coffee, like having a party at your house, party at your house. Like, yeah. I can't even do like all those things that I would just normally do as a leader, I can't do. And so it's, just like everybody else, the pandemic has forced us all to be more creative and innovative in the ways in which we do things, right? So, of course, I thank you, Noelle, and the Peak ambassadors, and Margie Oldham as well, for helping me to kind of strategize, how can I now communicate with my new organization without being able to do that in person, right? So that's been probably the first big challenge. And the second one is that, of course, we're walking into a difficult budgetary situation, right? So as a new leader, you're coming into an organization that's facing, some very serious budget cuts. And they're, really no fault of the organization, right? These are pandemic related cuts due to projected decreases in enrollment and due to decreases in state appropriations because of decreased, sales tax and things like that that's coming into the state. So it's been, that's probably been the most difficult.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
How can we expect yearly merit review expectations to be affected by the move to R2?
Okay, so this is actually a great thing, right? So that we were designated an R2 school, which means that we have a certain level of research, output, productivity, and graduate education. And I hear in this question a little bit of concern, about possibly being evaluated versus a higher standard than before, right? And I want to assure people that I don't hear, as dean, I don't hear any discussion in upper administration about that. Your merit review expectations really should reflect your workload allocation, right? So if your workload allocation is 40% teaching, 40% research, 20% service, which is sort of the bulk of our tenure track faculty, or 95.5 for our instructors, or something else, that's what your annual merit review should be based on, your relative efforts in the 3 areas. And so, unless your workload allocation changes, those expectations shouldn't change. Now, my sense, though, is, coming in as a new dean, right? We're newly R2. And I think that, we just sort of kind of just made that threshold, right? Mm-hmm. And I suspect that the administration would like to keep that status, right? That is my impression. One of the ways to do that, I think, to ensure that we maintain that R2 status is to move some interested faculty from a 3-2 load to a 2-2 load in teaching. And thereby changing your workload allocation. So instead of being equally balanced in research and teaching, you might actually be, teaching slightly less and researching slightly more. Now, of course, if I could just wave a magic wand and do that for anybody who wanted to, that would be wonderful. But it actually costs money, right? Because now if you have 10 faculty members who used to teach 10 classes, and now there's 10 faculty members only teaching 5 classes. Now I have to hire people to teach those other classes, right?
Right.
So it's not a magic wand kind of a thing. As we move into the RCM budget model, we can reevaluate that. One way to sort of do that slowly is to think maybe about the faculty teaching and doctoral programs, right? Because they're already, doing a significant amount of research, especially with the graduate students, et cetera. But anyway, it's a conversation that I'm open to. I think that it would help the university's strategic plan to make sure that we are retaining our R2 status. But unless you are really moving from a 3-2 to a 2-2, the annual merit expectations have not changed. So that's not something I think that you need to worry about.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, I believe we are on our last question here. So this question is, students of color / LGBTQ students often turn to professors with similar identities for mentoring. Is there a discussion on how to recognize this often unevenly distributed labor?
So this question is kind of like the story of my life, and that's okay. One of the things that I think it's important to remember is that work is incredibly important, right? I have no delusions that as a Hispanic, Jewish, non-binary, bisexual dean, that I'm not going to have any conversations about that, right? Right. And I've already given interviews and been asked to speak, and it's I've only been here for 2 months, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't resist that because I realize that it's actually important, that representation. That said, I'm already the dean, right? So where it gets tough is, let's say maybe you're a tenure track assistant professor, right? And you're trying to make tenure, or you're an instructor and you want to make senior instructor. Then you do have to be careful and conscious of how you spend your time, right? So that you can meet the expectations of the various categories of responsibility as a faculty member. So, I mean, there's some advice that I usually give people in this regard. And the first bit is really to make sure that you're documenting everything that you do, right? So that you have that as part of your portfolio in your dossier. And and people say, well, okay, but how do I document like every kid that comes in crying to my office, right? You can just call that informal mentorship of LGBTQ students or whatever it is. And people understand what that means. The second recommendation that I have for people is to formalize those commitments by volunteering for diversity-related committees, or to be a faculty advisor of the Spectrum Club, or whatever it is. That way, you're not only helping those students, individuals who come in for support to your office, but you formalize that in a sort of documentable, CVable line item in your service, right? So then the third thing you have to do is you have to learn how to say no. Okay, and this is really, really hard because your chair will come to you and say, I think you'd be really, really good on that assessment committee or the library committee or whatever committee it is, right? And you feel like you have to say yes because your chair has asked you, and because you're supposed to be doing service and you should be serving on a committee. But I think what my point is that if you have actively sought out the service commitments that are meaningful to you, right, then you can say no to things that aren't. Maybe assessment isn't really my thing, and I can now that I'm the faculty advisor, of this club, and I'm already on this diversity committee or whatever, and now I can say no to assessment because I'm already booked. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see. Mm-hmm.
And then the last thing that I think is critically important, especially for tenure track faculty and then mid-career faculty too, this happens to, once you get tenure, then sometimes it's hard to make full professor because you suddenly get asked to do all these other service obligations, is to really carefully carve out your research time. So, and then don't give it up, right? So just like I have this class that I'm teaching Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9 a.m., right? I'm working on this article on Tuesdays and Thursdays, from 3 to 5 p.m. Gotcha. Right? And you block that time off. You're not available. And of course, you have to take into consideration regular meeting times of those other, groups that you're on, but to try to find those blocks and actually put them in your calendar and actually, think about making sure that you're actually, doing that work at that time. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, those are some fantastic words. Whoa. Fantastic answers, Dean Vidler. Thank you so much for your time. That is all I have today. So I just want to say thank you again, and I guess welcome to UCCS, since this is a follow-up from your town hall. And just so much I am struggling, apparently. I cannot talk. So I'm just going to wrap it up there and say thank you so much. And then I am going to clear us now.
All right. Thanks, everybody.